So, how many of you have been skiing? A few of you. How long should it take somebody to get down this mountain? Any ideas? A few seconds, few minutes, an hour? Okay. Mountains are often used as metaphors for reaching success. You overcome obstacles and you reach that peak. And many motivational speeches will follow that pattern. But this isn't one of them. This is actually about the other side. It's about descending and maybe even falling, and how that can have just as much of an impact on shaping who you are. And this is me on my very first skiing trip this winter. We're going to come back to the story in just a little bit. First, I want to tell you about my life as a Sherpa. In 2012, I became the advisor for a leadership program called Renaissance, which is now called Grizzly Achievement. And that program is sponsored by Jostens. And that company hired a life coach for me for my first year as advisor. And in working with my life coach through a variety of activities and exercises, we realized that an important or appropriate metaphor for how I was living my life was that of the ever-diligent Sherpa. If you don't know what a Sherpa is, the Sherpa are Tibetan people who help those who are going up the Himalayan mountains by guiding them and protecting them along the way. And that's really how I was living my life. I saw it as my job to make sure the people that I cared about were successful, and I did everything I could to guide and protect them along the way. I was really worried about people in my life failing. My children, my students, my husband, and so it was my job to have all the answers and to make sure I knew exactly how they needed to approach their life in order to reach success. But what we also realized is that by living in that metaphor, I was also in a constant state of fear. I worried all the time about the success of those that I cared about. Even something as small as a text message or an unexpected phone call would seize me up because I would worry that I hadn't anticipated a need, or that I hadn't taken care of a problem, or I wouldn't have the answer for whoever was on the other line. It led me to focus so much on other people that I really didn't take care of myself. And I was heavy, and I was tired, and any sense of joy that I had came from the success of others, which meant I lost pretty much any peace with myself. On the outside, I don't think people would have realized that I was struggling with this confidence issue and with this fear. On the outside, I was willing to put myself out in front of people. In high school, I remember my very first rally as a freshman. I rolled a peanut across the floor, the entire gym floor, with my nose. And that led to continuing in student leadership. I lip-synced as Madonna, danced in front of my entire school all by myself to the mortification of my brother who was in the audience. And it seemed like I had all the confidence in the world. I went off to college and I continued with leadership. I was in my dorm council and my college council. And even when I became a teacher, I was a teacher leader. I was always on committees or helping out with workshops or putting myself out there as somebody who was willing to lead and serve others. But inside, I dreaded being wrong, because being wrong meant disappointing others. And so, because of that, I avoided asking questions, I avoided conflict, and I consistently sought to put other people above myself. I remember when I was in elementary school, my mom sat me down and we were going to have the talk. And the very first thing that she said to me was, "Well, you're smart. You probably know all about this." And because I didn't want to disappoint her by not having all the answers, and because I didn't want to make her uncomfortable by having questions, I said, "Yes, I know all about it. You don't need to tell me anything." And I was totally lying. I had no idea. I was in 6th grade and still thought that I could get pregnant by kissing a boy. So I had a lot of questions. But my value, I felt, came from being smart and from being kind. And so any failure in those two areas was not just a simple mistake. It was evidence that I didn't have value or that I was a fraud. Some of the consequences of that were fairly small. For example, getting a C my first semester in college because I was too embarrassed to go to office hours and talk to my professor, even though I had absolutely no idea what was going on in class. But some of the consequences were a lot more serious, such as staying in a marriage that was unhealthy because it only served the needs of one and not two. So if I wasn't going to continue my life as the Sherpa, then what was I going to be? My life coach and I constructed a new metaphor for my life, and this metaphor was that of the courageous sage in the city. The courageous sage in the city and the ever-diligent Sherpa both want to guide others. They both want to use their experience in order to help other people, but they do it in very different ways. The Sherpa does that by taking on the burdens of others and always putting others before herself, even if it's at risk to herself. The sage in the city leads others by realizing that she learns when she opens herself up to risk, and that by doing that, she gives others the opportunity to do that as well. The Sherpa sees one path and one goal, one destination. The sage in the city sees multiple paths to joy. It's not just a perilous uphill climb to one destination. Instead, life as the sage in the city became a wild grid of opportunity where a wrong turn could just as easily become the right one. Making this change in my life wasn't easy, but I realized that I couldn't continue to live as the Sherpa. I couldn't breathe being the Sherpa. The air was too thin and the weight was too heavy, and I would completely lose myself in that process. And so I had to live a different way. And that was scary, and it came with probably the biggest failure of my life, which was the failure of my marriage. But I can honestly say that I have found the better me. And the world that I'm living in now is teaching me so much about myself and about others and about the way that I want to live my life. One example of that is that in 2012, when I started this journey, I had never run a complete mile in my entire life. And in February, I completed my second half marathon. Another example is that I started this by taking on the role of advisor to Grizzly Achievement. A year later, I also took on the role of being activities director. And having both of those very active, busy, important programs to run was a huge challenge. But what took even more courage was 3 years later deciding to step away from that role as activities director, because I knew that my children needed me, they needed my time, and I needed me. I needed time to develop myself beyond my role at school. And so that leads us to the mountain again. At 43, I went on my very first skiing trip, and I had absolutely no experiences that would prepare me for success in trying to take on this mountain. I only had a few encouraging friends who were willing to take me along with them. So we get to the mountain, and I snap on the skis, and within 3 strides, I'm on the ski lift, heading up to the top of the mountain. Get off the ski lift, I immediately fall. Skis pop off, butt in the snow. Somewhat expected, I was told this happens a lot, but that wasn't my last fall. Well, not even close to my last fall. By my count, it probably was about 15 falls, and I wasn't even halfway down the mountain yet. I don't know if any of you have tried to stand up after falling down on skis, but it's not easy. My legs had turned to jelly. I had tears of frustration in my eyes. I was sweating so badly that my ski lift, my pass, was in my ski pants pocket, and it had completely turned to mush from all the sweat just soaking through because I was just working so hard and so frustrated. But I kept getting up, even though I kept falling again and again. And probably about 3/4 of the way down the mountain, I had a handle on it just enough to slowly, very, very slowly glide to the bottom. It had taken me 1 hour and 47 minutes to get down the mountain one time. And I'd like to say that I just hopped back on that ski lift and went back up, but our time was up for the day. Didn't have enough time on my pass to do that, and so it would have to wait until the next day. And in motivational speaker world, This is where we overcome those obstacles and we go to the top of that mountain and we conquer it. But that's not what happened. I had twisted my knee so many times by trying to stand myself up and being a little stubborn and doing that by myself way too many times that I could hardly walk on it that night. And the next morning it wasn't much better. And I had a half marathon waiting for me just a few weeks out from this skiing trip. And so I decided that even though it might disappoint the people that I was with, and even though it was going to seem like a failure, and it was, I wasn't going to take on that mountain again on the second day. Instead, I sat by the fire pit. I watched my friends ski what they said was incredible powder. I listened to conversations from the people around me. I enjoyed the beauty of the day, and I loved it. It was an amazing day. And it was an even more amazing day a few weeks later when I crossed the finish line of that second half marathon. And I knew that by allowing myself to experience the failure on the ski slope, that I had set myself up for success on my run. It's okay. I have realized that being able to breathe is the most important thing that I need to do. And I may have fear, I can have that fear, but I don't need to be that fear. Regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the situation, I can accept whatever comes at me, and I might soar, I might be amazing, but I might not. And I can find peace at the bottom of the mountain just as well as at the top of the mountain. So now I know that I'm willing to fall and I'm willing to fail just as long as I keep breathing. Thank you.